Alrighty. Hello and welcome to my explanation of texture in music. So, we've got some interesting stuff going on when we talk about music because we don't really have many sound words in English. And by sound words, I mean we have high pitch, we have low pitch, we have loud, we have soft. But then after that, we kind of just start grabbing words from other senses like sight and taste and feel, like the word sharp comes from something hurting. Um, the word flat comes from something flattening out, which is visual. We have hot and breathy, and we have big, which is a size word, right? And then we start getting into texture words that we talk about thick, thin, complicated. So we start drawing words that don't originally have to do with sound, but we kind of contextualize them to the point where they are. So let's talk about some texture that doesn't have to do with music, and then we will apply those words to music and it'll start to make sense. So let's look at some letters. Okay? If we would describe the texture of lettuce, we would say thin, because it's a thin piece of lettuce, right? Right now it's a bit crunchy because it's all clumped up like that, right? But imagine we left the lettuce out probably a little too long and it started to go soft and wilted. It wouldn't be crunchy anymore. It'd be soft. And you could even use the word wilted, right? Cool. So let's talk about a chip. Classic Dorito, let's go. So if we have a Dorito chip, we can call it crunchy. We can call it sharp. We could start describing the flavor. We could say spicy. We could say cheesy. Um, but then when we bite into it, it turns into lots of little sharp little bits, right? But all of those bits are still pretty thin. Okay, so you would say the Dorito has a thin texture, but all those other words about being spicy and cheesy, they're all totally fine ways of describing the texture. Okay, now let's look at a burger. Okay, the lettuce is thin, the tomato is pretty thin, the meat patty is pretty thick. It's about this thick. Cool. It's also chewy. It's got like grains in it and stuff. And the buns are really soft. Okay. So nothing there screams, yo, this is the thickest piece of food I've ever seen. But as a whole, that burger probably looks bigger than my mouth. I would call that thick. As a combination of things, it becomes thick. Okay. Let's quickly look at something else. Okay. So, chocolate. Normally it's pretty soft. Okay. And a chocolate bar is normally snack size, right? So you can normally chew on it. So normally chocolate's pretty thin. Not as thin as a chip or as lettuce, but it's pretty thin and it's normally pretty soft. But imagine you put a Cadbury chocolate bar in the freezer. Okay. That thing is going to turn to rock. A frozen chocolate bar is thick. Okay. So the context of what we're talking about matters as well. It's not just chocolate bar is thick, right? It also depends on where it was stored, the way you're encountering it. For instance, if a chocolate bar is on a burger, the chocolate bar is pretty thin compared to the burger, but as a whole, it's even thicker than before. Okay. Now, let's look at a crunchy chocolate. Okay. Crunchy chocolates are so crunchy, right? So I would say compared to another chocolate bar, this thing is thick. Thick with two C's for sure. Okay. But we can't just say crunchy chocolate bars are always thick, because what if we just take a really thin slice of this crunchy bar and then talk about it? Is this crunchy bar thick? No. I'd say this little thin wafer of crunchy bar is thin. Sure, it'd still be a little bit crunchy, but overall it's thin, right? So the context matters. So now, let's take this to a musical point, okay? Let's pull up a piece of music. Okay. Look at that. That hurts my brain to look at. Music theory can be painful, but let's use some texture words to describe it, okay? This piece of music's pretty thick. The reason I know why is because there is so many dots on the page. Look at this. Look at all those dots. Imagine getting out your pen and paper and going face into space for all of this. So this texture here is very, very thick. But what happens, same thing with the crunchy, slice out a little bit and just look at it. So I'm going to slice out this melody here, okay? Boom. This melody, pretty thin. It's not many dots. Not many weird rhythms. There's a little bit weirdness here, a little bit of weirdness here, but everything else is just crotchets. Okay? So you would say this has a thin texture. But once again, context. What instrument's playing this? Piano? Yeah, texture's pretty thin. Voice? Yeah, texture's pretty thin. The inception sound or the sound of an Autobot transforming every single time one of these notes plays, that boy thick. Okay? So we start using different words to describe what's going on. For instance, if we say a violin was playing this, not only would you say it's thin, you could say it's gentle. You could say maybe it's higher pitch. It's a coarse texture because you can hear the sound of the thing rubbing on the string. But if you compare that to like a really high pitched singer who has like an opera voice, right? The opera voice might be a little more full and a little more intense. So a good rule of thumb is texture is how much stuff is there and what is the stuff made of. Okay, so let's apply this, okay? Let's say we want to make some music for a quick, happy 3-second scene in a YouTube video we're making, okay? I've just plopped down some stuff, okay? Let's open up a thing in Soundtrap, drag this out so it fits there, and let's click some random notes, white keys only, just to make a song. Cool. Some of these aren't on white notes, so I'm going to move them. Cool. And I'm going to change the length of some of them. Cool. Let's listen to that. Cool. So that right there, look at that. There's a line there, there's a line there. None of them are touching. None of them are over the top of each other. This piece of music has a thin texture. Okay? Super simple. But what happens if we copy and paste this? Control C onto the clarinet as well. Let's listen to that. It didn't sound that different. I would say that's still pretty thin. What if we add another instrument? Let's add it to the string section. So immediately I can tell that's starting to get thicker, right? But we can make this even more hectic. Let's grab these. Okay, I'm going to grab all of this. I'm going to copy and paste it in. And also harmonize it. And whenever I see a black note, I'll move it off of the black note. Cool. Let's listen to that. Sounds much thicker. Cool. What if we do that for this as well? Copy and paste. And we're going to drag it down this time. Whenever I see a black note, I'm going to move it off of it. I don't see any black notes. Let's give it a listen. So now let's compare that to what it sounded like in the first place. Cool. We can say this has a thick texture. Visually, you can see there's more lines on top of each other at the same time. It's thicker. Okay, same thing happens for if we, instead of horizontally, we think vertically. What if we grab our pencil out and just start going? Lots of dots instead. Cool. So instead of thinking this direction, I'm making it thicker the other direction. And I'm just going to delete some extra notes so there's not too much clutter. Cool. Let's listen to that. How thick is this? That's disgusting. So not only is it thick, it's also clustered and distorting because the pitches aren't correct. So I hope you got some understanding of texture in a musical context, just looking at the food analogy where we're using texture, taste words to describe things, right? Um, but then also from a visual standpoint, when you're looking at standard notation, but also horizontally like this when you're recording music.